Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and our DJ Tolliver is here as well. Yeah. And Tolliver, as is often the case, people are living very different lives in this country depending on where they are right now. If you look at the top story in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune as we go to air, it is Trump threatens to send troops to Minnesota. If you look at the Miami Herald, it is Trump meets with Machado, the opposition leader from Venezuela, but keeps channels open with Venezuelan regime leaders. And if you look at the Houston Chronicle, the top story is, here's what Houston residents complained about most in 2025. I'm not kidding. That is
that our topic today?
That is not our topic, unfortunately.
Shame.
That would be good. But no, that is the outlier because, as you know, Trump is part of almost all the news all the time now. And believe it or not, it has been just about 1 year since he took office for the second time. A lot has happened in that year, and Trump is quite proud.
We've set all-time records for the lowest number of illegal border crossings ever recorded. Think of that, ever recorded. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. A lot of winning out there, and we're having a good day in the stock market, as you can see, an all-time record day, and hopefully it continues. I think it should. We have many people that don't work. We have many people probably that aren't even living that are getting checks. And we're finding all of that out, and it's being reported. We're going to save hundreds of billions of dollars.
Trump's critics, meanwhile, have a much different assessment of the past year.
Every day, Donald Trump is making this nation look more and more like a fascist state.
ICE is harassing people for not being white. That's not making America great.
And if Americans want proof that Donald Trump's trade war has been a catastrophe, considering this. While he capitulates to Beijing, he's raising tariffs on Canada. How nonsensical, how stupid, how thoughtless.
So this hour, we want to know how you've been affected personally, if you have, by Trump's policies. Did you lose your job because of DOGE cuts? Do you know someone who's been deported in the president's immigration crackdown? Are you putting in a pool because your stock portfolio is through the roof? Or has your life been relatively unaffected? You can call in at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. We'll get to that in just a moment. But first, last week we asked what socialism means to you as Zoran Mamdani became New York City's first Democratic Socialist mayor. Here are some of the voicemails we got.
This is Jack from Easton, Pennsylvania. There's two kinds of socialism. There's authoritarian socialism, such as existed in the Soviet Union, where the people really had no electoral power. And then there's democratic socialism, which is responsive to the voters.
Hi, my name is Ann Hogan. I'm from Lowell, Mass. When I think of socialism, I think of the Karl Marx comment, from each according to ability to each according to need, which is a kind way of looking at helping people in society who have less than others.
Hi, this is Noah. I'm calling from South Carolina. I think when we look at socialism in other countries, it tends not to go like super well. But on the other hand, I think the way that we're doing capitalism in America is really not working either.
Well, thanks to everyone who called in. As always, you can hear that whole show by subscribing to The Middle wherever you get your podcasts. And here are our new weekly podcast extra, The Follow-Up, which includes more of your comments. So now to our topic this hour. How has the first year of Trump's second presidency affected you personally? Tolliver, how can people reach us?
You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, all the places.
Well, joining us this hour, USA Today chief political correspondent Phillip Bailey. Hi, Phillip.
Jeremy, what's going on?
And veteran CNN political correspondent Candy Crowley. Candy, welcome back to you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, I think we may have some recency bias in this conversation because it's hard to look past what has been happening in Minnesota, in Venezuela, threatening to take over Greenland. But Phillip, if you look at the last year, what do you think is the biggest change for most Americans?
Well, look, America is a different place. And I think that when you look at President Trump's return to office, right, it's sort of stunning in the scope in which he's been able to touch, not just in politics, but even in culture. We see some changes even there with his advent, his return to power. I would say that it's pretty obvious that the crackdown on immigration, putting ICE agents, adding how many different ICE officers to that agency, sending the National Guard, the use of force, military force, in cities in particular, I think, is rather stunning when you consider that the last time we really saw a president do this was, sometimes in like the late 1960s or in the early 1960s during the civil rights era. So that to me would be probably the most obvious answer to what has Donald Trump changed in his first year since he's been back in power.
Candy, what do you think? Where are Americans feeling the president's policies the most?
I thought a lot about this. So I knew I was going to be on talking about this question. And honestly, if I had to say one thing, it's not a policy. It's certainly, what's going on with ICE is, to me, the major thing. But I think it's what all of this causes. People say all the time, Wall Street hates uncertainty, which does make you wonder why it's doing so well. But nonetheless, Main Street doesn't like uncertainty either. So if you talk to people, and I have friends that are in Michigan, I'm in Washington now, but that are very Trump oriented. I have a lot of friends that are not Trump oriented. All of them feel this sort of sense of anxiety. Right? It's the kind of like, and now what's happened in this 5 minutes, and what does that mean? And so to me, it's a sort of a broader thing than one policy. It's the uncertainty of what next.
And Candy, on the issue of the economy, which tends to be one of the most important issues to voters, Trump now has a 36% approval on the economy in a new Reuters Ipsos poll. Do you think the economy, given everything you just said, is still the most important thing for people and how they're feeling personally about their economy?
Sure. Although I think the last week of ICE in Minnesota certainly has gotten a lot of attention. The video of this woman being shot in the face 3 times, I saw somewhere over 80% of Americans have seen that. So it would say to me that this week, the whole kind of militarization of the streets of America or of the streets of democratic cities, however you want to look at it, has taken over. But I think in the long run, it's almost always pocketbook, and I think it still is, particularly since you don't know where it's going. I feel so badly for small businesses who don't know what's the Supreme Court going to do, and then after the Supreme Court does what it does, what's Donald Trump going to do, and then what was Congress going to do? And so it's so roiled, and it makes everyone feel unstable. And the first place you feel unstable is, can I pay my bills? Can I still pay for college for my child? That kind of thing. So I think the big undertow is the economy, but boy, some things come along that are just sort of giant waves on top of it.
A lot of uncertainty, but Phillip, we've done shows about the economy, and we've heard from small business owners who are feeling the effects of the tariffs that have really changed their entire business model because of how much they get from China or from other countries. What's your sense right now of how Americans are feeling Trump's economy?
Well, look, I think Donald Trump has learned that it's easier said than done, right, to fix and tame the American economy. We all remember it was not too long ago, a few short years ago, the Biden administration kept telling Americans, don't worry, look at the big macro improvements in the economy, and the American people weren't feeling it. Well, now Donald Trump is learning that on his side, on the governing side, not on the campaign side, a lot of those big promises he made, Jeremy, during that campaign, I think we oftentimes forget, President Trump made some pretty bold, outrageous sort of promises, right? Like saying he was going to have or cut in half energy costs. In fact, energy costs are going in the opposite direction by about 41%. So look, I think Donald Trump is learning as he sees some of his own supporters, particularly younger, white, working class men, some of whom I've talked to, who aren't really feeling the Trump improvement or the Trump boom that he talks about on the campaign trail, talks about when he's touring the rest of the country. I think that for him has been more difficult than he wants to admit. Even allies say that, look, they're looking for some things to come online later on in the year with the tax returns and the one big beautiful bill. But I don't see that there's a lot of confidence, and a lot of folks are having buyer's remorse right now.
Candy, let me just ask you about one more thing before we start getting into some calls, which is the retribution that Trump takes on people that cross him. Now, that may not be felt by ordinary Americans, but I wonder if it is when, the Fed chair refuses to bow to the president on interest rates and he gets investigated, or Republican members of Congress say they want the Epstein files released and Trump just completely turns on them, or the universities around the country that lose their funding because they do something that he doesn't like. Do Americans feel that retribution?
I think so to a certain extent. I'm sort of in ascending and descending order. I think the retribution is so vast. It's like every day somebody else is being investigated by the Justice Department, or, the grand jury is discussing this. And a lot of people, the names are not completely familiar to people that have followed it all along and kind of know and that kind of stuff. So I think that's has less juice, if you will, in the American public than some of the others that you see. I think there's starting to be some sink in with obviously the tariffs, which I thought for a while, are people gonna, when nothing had sort of happened yet, they just had been imposed and it was a big argument. People didn't feel it, so it didn't. His numbers were still okay. And then once people, like talking about the small businesses, started to feel it, it became sort of more widespread. But I think other things sort of take precedence, and honestly, it depends on the week. Like what has happened in some ways, and I think this is completely purposeful on the part of the Trump administration. Things come up. I think Epstein obviously has legs. It always has. And it has legs in places that hurt him, and that's his base. So there is, I think that's an exception to, well, there's this and there's this and there's that. But I do think, over time, it's, like water on a rock. It begins to make a difference.
Right. Our number is 844-4MIDDLE. That is 844-464-3353. Or, of course, you can reach out online at listentothemiddle.com. And Tolliver, some people are already doing that. What are you hearing?
Yeah, Fernando in St. Louis says, my yearly bonus was the leanest of my life. Kelly in Minneapolis says, my city is currently overrun with overzealous, untrained, armed racists. And Chris writes from Latin America, my response to the Trump administration's policies was to leave the country. I did so for my own safety. So, a lot coming in.
Because so many people, after the election, a lot of people did say they were going to do that, but I haven't seen personally so many actually do that, but apparently Chris did. Tolliver, what are we listening to here?
This is Kendrick Lamar with TV Off. So he performed this at the Super Bowl. It was a very patriotic performance that all Americans could rally around. You remember that, right, Jeremy?
Right when Trump came in, right.
More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. And this hour, we're asking you how the first year of Trump's second presidency has affected you personally. Tolliver, what is the number to call in?
It's 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media.
All right, let's get to the phones because they're lighting up. Devin is calling in from Brewster, New York. Devin, go ahead. How has the first year of Trump's presidency affected you?
Hey, Jeremy, how you doing?
Good.
Hello? Yeah, it's good. Yeah, well, look, at the grocery store, simply at the grocery store, the meat prices. The meat prices is absolutely ridiculous. I have to settle for, I like a certain type of meat, and I can't even afford it. I have to get a meat that cost is lower, at a lower cost. The grocery prices are just so high that I can't even shop. I can't stay on my budget, And then just two more things with the it's affecting my mental health with the executive overreach, the policies, like with the trying to cut funding for sanctuary cities, or trying to indict, like Candy was saying, trying to indict this person, trying to indict that person. And, it's just a mess.
It's affecting your mental health. It's raising your blood pressure. Right. Well, at least you can't afford the beef. So maybe that's better. But anyway, Devin, thank you very much for that. Phillip Bailey, on the first point, that the issue of the cost of things at the supermarket, the Trump administration likes to say right now that they're coming down, but people can see with their own eyes what's happening.
And that's the thing about the American economy, Jeremy, when politicians and academics can use these sort of larger macro yardsticks, but Americans get to every day look at the gas prices, look at grocery prices and say, I'm not feeling that. And look, Donald Trump, again, made a bunch of broad promises on everything from energy costs, reducing grocery prices to inflation. In fact, 2 days ago, I believe in Michigan, he declared that inflation was defeated. But in fact, current inflation, about 2.7%, is virtually unchanged from the 2.8% rate when he his first full month in office. So look, when people deal with the economy, I think one thing that, I've talked to different sources on, Heritage Foundation, Brookings Institution, I asked them, is it wise for presidents to still make it seem like they control or can influence the American economy? And I think that Donald Trump is going to learn this year in particular in the midterms, because now Democrats have basically seized his argument that the president doesn't care about you. He's not talking about, your grocery prices. He's more concerned about building a ballroom in the White House. And even Republicans, including former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, are saying, look, President Trump and some of the Republicans on their side have sort of lost the plot on this. And that was the whole essence, really, of America First and Make America Great Again, was dealing with the hard, pocketbook issues for working class Americans.
David is calling in from Swan Valley, Idaho. David, go ahead with your thoughts about Trump's first year. How's it affecting you?
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. I drive about 50 or 60,000 miles a year. I'm a traveling music teacher, and it was pretty frustrating during the previous administration as gas prices just went skyrocketing and inflation was out of control, mainly because of all the government overspending. And then I'm not a fan of Donald Trump per se, but as costs, he's cut spending, and he's pushed for cutting spending, and he's pushed for policies that would help gas prices come down. And indeed, they have come down a lot. And so it's really made a big difference for me in my business to not have that out of control government spending making all those prices go through the roof.
Well, and David, gas prices
gasoline
have come down, but have you seen prices go up in other places, like Phillip was saying, with energy costs just at home or in your business?
Well, we have good energy costs where we are. We get it out of northern Star Valley, Wyoming. It stayed pretty stable growth throughout the last many years.
So not too bad for you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but 200% inflation on one item that I use a lot was pretty tough. And as it came down, that really improved my bottom line a lot.
Yeah. So you're happy about those gas prices. Candy Crowley, it's funny. You think about all the years in the past when that is one of the biggest issues leading into an election is the gas prices.
Right. And sort of getting back a little bit to what Phillip said, presidents can tinker around the edges of an economy, but it seems to me that, then I'm not an economist and I won't play one here, but it seems to me that the economy has a role of its own. And certain things from the outside and from the inside affect it more than a president does. I mean, I think oil prices is a pretty good example. There are a lot of different reasons that oil has come down, and less about policy than about circumstance. So he is lucky in that. He's not lucky in the beef prices. He's not lucky in a number of other, with coffee and some other things I saw today.
Which are connected to the tariffs, by the way, too. I think that's one of the reasons why he tried to exempt those things from his tariffs, because he saw that the prices were going up.
Right, exactly. So I think, it obviously depends on what you buy and what you need. And I do think there are people, I mean, if you've got a lot of your money on Wall Street, you are happy as can be. Right. So, there's a yin and a yang.
Yeah. Alejandro is in San Antonio, Texas. Alejandro, what about you? How's the Trump administration affecting you personally?
Well, I am a recovering addict. Not only am I a recovering addict, but I've worked in the industry. And I have heard hundreds of people in clinics around San Antonio have lost the medication that they need to stay sober because of the cuts. Now, I know that Trump said that he declared war on addiction, but he's doing a lot of things to the opposite. Now, I've been sober for 4 going on 5 years, so I am better off than a lot of people that I see who are getting cut off their methadone and their Suboxone, and there's the likelihood that they're going to be able to stay sober is very small. And I am predicting a large increase in overdoses.
Alejandro, thank you for calling in and telling us that. Phillip Bailey, there have been huge cuts to so many programs, to nonprofit organizations that deal with things like addiction under the Trump administration. And Alejandro says it's going to really start to be seen.
Well, look, I think along with the Doge cuts earlier or late last year, back in 2025, but that along with the one big beautiful bill where we saw, these immense tax cuts for people who are in the 1%, people who are doing very, very well, high income earners. At the same time, a lot of these cuts to programs basically for the poor. Now, Donald Trump has not touched a penny in Social Security, but he has signed legislation that makes significant cuts to Medicaid and other safety net programs. So that, along with the dismantling of key institutions, key agencies in the federal government, that a lot of people, including MAGA voters, right? When people think about food stamps, for example, they may want to think about Keisha and Jamal in Harlem or Southside Chicago, but you need to be thinking about Billy Bob and Sue Ann in Hazard, Kentucky, and parts of rural Arkansas and West Virginia. That's who the folks who are most dependent on those safety net programs. And you saw Republicans, some like Josh Hawley, senator from Missouri, make that point. And I think that's where I began to really see, the Trump coalition begin to erode. And that's another feature, I think, of President Donald Trump in this past year, is that he really very quickly and rapidly sort of eroded his own base on a number of fronts, internationally, but definitely domestically. And as the caller spoke to, those working class white voters who turned their votes over to Donald Trump got kicked in the teeth in terms of the cuts to those safety programs that a lot of them rely on.
Candy Crowley, the Republicans have really stayed in lockstep in Congress with the president. Do you see that changing as we get closer to the midterm elections, especially as there have been some special elections that have scared Republicans?
Yeah, we're seeing little bits and pieces on various things, Greenland in particular, just because there are Republicans who find that outrageous and have begun to speak on Capitol Hill. I think erosion will start after the primaries. I think that's if you're going to start breaking away, because there's so many Republicans that the primaries really the election, because we're so, the red and the blue are so stable that if you can challenge and beat your primary opponent, if you're conservative, if you can beat someone more conservative, you're going to win the election. So in most cases,
right.
maybe not in purple states. So I think the demarcation will be after the primaries and after these guys are assured that they're going to be able to run again. And I think then you'll begin to see some breakaway.
Nikki is calling in from Kansas City, Missouri. Hi, Nikki. What about you? How has Trump's first year affected you personally?
So I would say there's been three things specifically. One is my family's on the Affordable Care Act, and it is more than doubled. The other one is I had some employees, or not employees, but coworkers, and they were from Mexico. They'd been here for over a decade, but they chose very early on in 2025 to move their entire family back because they had an adult child with special needs, and they could not risk being, taken away and not knowing the, status of their child. And then
they
the third one is
self-deported,
like,
you're saying?
Yeah, they absolutely did. The other one is just, I've never thought that in my lifetime I would have to consider to what extent I would be wanting to put myself in danger and my family to then protect those who have, who are in danger and whose voices aren't being heard. And like very much like Anne Frank and the Holocaust and growing up on that, I never thought I would be there in my country.
And you feel like you're doing that now?
I feel like I am. Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, especially after last week with the shots to Renee
Nicole Good, yeah.
It's very much, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Nikki, thank you very much for that call. A lot there, Phillip, on a lot of different things that we've been talking about, but I'm glad that she brought up the ACA because this is something that has just happened. People's rates for insurance have gone way up. There's still a question about whether Congress is going to do something about it.
And I think, well, as Candy mentioned earlier, as we see Republicans, and I think she's right, we'll see this pick up maybe after the primaries. We saw around 17 House Republicans break with party leadership. And while we have this conversation, Jeremy, going on about President Trump's first year in office, I think we should also look at Congress and the Republican caucuses in both chambers. You haven't really seen, as until lately, these Republican members breaking with party leadership on numerous issues, not just the Epstein files, but now on the ACA subsidies over on the Senate side, on the Venezuelan war powers resolution, even though that was ultimately defeated. So you are seeing Republicans wising up to the fact that, look, they're going to be on the ballot when Donald Trump is not going to be on the ballot. And I think they're coming to that realization. Let's remember, after the impeachment of Donald Trump, many of those handful of Republicans who voted for that impeachment were picked off one at a time. We, of course, know Liz Cheney from Wyoming. She lost that primary battle. It should be interesting to see these Republicans who bucked Donald Trump this go-round, like Congressman Thomas Massie here in my home state of Kentucky. And Trump has endorsed his opponent. It's not the first time he's had problems with Congressman Massey, who has survived those challenges before. But it'll be interesting to see if Donald Trump still has that strength in the Republican base in those primary elections. I suspect that a lot of his more populist-minded folks who he brought into the Republican Party, again, are not very happy with him on some of these domestic issues and may buck him and support those candidates, to support those incumbents that he's against.
Well, and a lot of people that have gone against him have decided that they're out, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tom Tillis, the senator of North Carolina, is leaving. Mitch McConnell, not a big fan of Donald Trump. He's done after the end of this term. Let's go to Andy, who's in Denver, Colorado. Andy, what about you? How has the first year affected you personally?
The first year has affected me so deeply and my family because my child is trans. And the full weight of the federal government has tried to deny the existence of trans as a way of living. And our whole world was turned upside down very recently when HHS told clinics that they could not allow treatment of youth under the age of 18 if they took, federal money. We all of a sudden, within 24 hours, had no treatment. There is no standard of care for how you stop or reverse or delay this treatment. And so it threw our whole world into a complete spin cycle to replace this care. And, going from the very specific to the very general, we started the term in a world where we recognized each other for our differences. And all of a sudden we have been bully pulpited and legislated out of our very identity. Stunning.
Yeah. Andy, thank you for that. Candy Crowley, it's possible that no group of people, we've talked about immigrants, obviously that has been a real target of the Trump administration, but so have trans people in this country. And we heard that very personally there from Andy.
Yeah, the cultural side of it has been cruel. And there is no, I think that does also affect people who don't have a trans child or any in the LGBT community, but understand, that we are a nation that's supposed to be welcoming, that's supposed to be diverse, that are also offended by this. So that, I think the cultural issues don't turn around easily. But I do think that the longer you go on and the more people you meet, and then you watch what really has been cruelty, it begins to really bother you. And I think it's one of those things that belongs on the top where the wave comes, the undercurrent still being the economy. And I think that the ACA also folds into that, because it's not just the people who can't afford, as the previous woman talked about, it's not just them. It's like, what next? It's that anxiety, because if people don't have insurance, they show up in the emergency rooms. If they show up in the emergency rooms of public hospitals, they get their whatever it is they need. And now they're sicker because they haven't had health care. And what happens? The hospitals raise their prices. What happens after that? The insurance companies raise their prices on all the other kinds of insurance that people have. And they also make smaller what they cover. So there's so much on that one thread of healthcare, and who's allowed to have healthcare. I think it's very much the same with the abortion issue. And I think that the country, despite how it voted last time, when you see the polling, the country is still left of center than the elections would have you believe. And so I think this kind of thing does have an effect.
Tolliver, we have comments coming in online. By the way, the phone lines are completely full, but I'm sure that there is a lot coming in on the website as well.
So much. Aisha in Ogden says, I lost my job at the IRS in February. I'm in the lowest paying job I've been in since being a teenager, and I'm currently facing homeless housing. Katrina in Carbondale says, my parents rely on Medicaid, and my mom can no longer work full-time due to cancer. Lucy in Grand Rapids says, besides the anguish and pain over what's happening to our communities, I can't afford health care now. I live below the poverty level and lost my food benefits. It's an FU sandwich, and it's a war on the poor and ethnic cleansing.
Well, thank you for not pulling a Mayor Fry on me and actually using the F word in the commentary, because the FCC is listening very closely. Tolliver, what are you listening? What are we listening to here?
This is the OJs with For the Love of Money, which is the famous The Apprentice theme song, which, in case you forgot, was hosted by Donald Trump before he was a politician. The Way We Were. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour, we're asking how the first year of Trump's second presidency has impacted you personally. I'm joined by USA Today chief political correspondent Phillip Bailey and former CNN chief political correspondent Candy Crowley. You can call in at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353, or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com. Let's go right back to the phones. Nathaniel is in Chicago. Hi, Nathaniel. What about you? How has the first year impacted you?
Hi, good evening. Ever since election, I noticed a serious change in discourse and people willing to accept conservative views. I'm a college student, and the majority of people disagree with me, which is fine. But I've noticed that I don't have to hide my opinions and be shamed for them, or my conservative opinions aren't considered extreme or radical anymore. And I very much appreciate that. Complete difference since the election.
How conservative are you, would you say, Nathaniel?
Pretty conservative. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
all right.
70%. Yeah.
Are you happy? Is there anything that Trump has done that you're not happy with, or are you happy with all of it?
Oh no. There's definitely things I don't like. Foreign policy, for one. I don't like to see the brutality in the streets. I don't like that, as it might be necessary, maybe not. But I very much appreciate the cultural change, or parts of it.
Yeah. Interesting. Nathaniel, thank you very much for that. Phillip, it's interesting. Some people would say that the discourse has gotten much worse, but for this conservative college student in Chicago, he says it's getting better.
Well, I think that, look, Donald Trump, when he entered into politics, one thing he wasn't was G-rated. And he certainly, and I think a lot of his supporters, and I think Democrats were caught flat-footed on this, the word policing, what they would describe as sort of the woke culture of the Biden era and around that time. You hear from a lot of folks, not just college students who have a more conservative bent, but even more progressive-minded folks sort of speak up now and say, look, I didn't feel comfortable talking about trans rights or these issues for fear of being maligned or pushed aside or canceled, right? And as overblown as that might be for some individuals, I do think that it did teach Democrats a lesson, and they're basically adopting it now, having more open dialogue, having conversations in spaces and places that they're usually not comfortable in historically. And I think that, Democrats got caught flat-footed there. But over the past 10 years that Donald Trump's been in our politics, and we've seen the coarsening of that discourse and out of the behavior of the president himself, who just recently flipped off, right, a Ford worker at the factory in Michigan. I don't think you would ever have seen Barack Obama or George W. Bush. I don't even think Richard Nixon, all right, in public would do something that way. So we've really seen the professional wrestling element of Donald Trump's persona really impact our politics. And I don't think that a lot of Democrats are still on that page of, let's go back to the way it was before. But I do think, this is also a president who, by the way, has been through 2 assassination attempts himself. Right. We saw Charlie Kirk last year in that heinous act of violence. So conservatives themselves have an interest in lowering the temperature because they're also being impacted by political violence and some of this coarsening rhetoric.
I remember, I don't know why this is sticking in my head, but it was a big story when George W. Bush as president called reporter Adam Clymer a major league a-hole for the New York Times. He used the real word. And that was a big story. Now, people just flip people off. They use the F word, F-bomb all the time. Okay. Sam is calling in from New York City. Sam, go ahead. How has the first year of the second Trump administration affected you personally?
Hi. Thanks for letting me on. So, so I'm an artist in New York City. Moved here to be an artist, and things have completely changed. I had to go corporate this year for the first time in my life. The National Endowment for the Arts has completely changed, and it's really caused a loss of funding and sort of a chilling effect on programming throughout regional theaters as well as national theaters. Of course, like the renaming of the Kennedy Center caused a lot of programs to leave the Kennedy Center, and because of that, there are so many opportunities for emerging and middle career artists disappearing. They've disappeared.
Huh. Do you think that that's going to be long lasting, Sam, or do you think that it's going to come back?
That's a hard question. I'm really not sure. I mean, just for an example, like I do a lot of children's theater, and a lot of theaters are just going for the Velveteen Rabbit now, right? They're not going for things that are new. They don't want to take any chances or risks. It's a very risky time to be in theater, especially with it's just a risky time. And I do think there's going to have long lasting effects on a lot of artists leaving the artist workforce.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Candy, I'm so glad that we heard from an artist, because that's a huge story all by itself.
It is. And one of the things that has encapsulated it, I do think, is the changing of the name of the Kennedy Center. The Peace Building in Washington also was a big deal here. I'm not sure a lot of people
The Institute
knew
for Peace.
about that. The Institute for Peace is now the Trump Institute for Peace, I think.
Right.
I can't remember the official name, but it has Trump in it. And I think those things, and what's happened with the Kennedy Center is you do have a lot of artists that are going, yeah, we're not coming. You had the opera recently for a variety of reasons. That Washington Opera has left and is going elsewhere, though we don't know where yet, I don't think. So I think that the big things that happen are the naming of a building. You think, why would anybody care about the naming of a building in Washington? It was the John F. Kennedy Center, so it's like iconic. And I think those things have a lot of the East Wing getting destroyed overnight and wanting to build a second story in the West Wing. I think those things do affect the public because they have some ownership in those places. So it's easy to understand, and it seems a little egotistical, and I think people don't like that.
David is calling in from Kalamazoo, Michigan. David, what about you? How has the first year affected you?
Hey, so I am a teacher, and I have had the privilege of watching students react to the Trump presidency through several years. And one thing I've noticed is that, at the high school level, the conservative students, the students who are big fans of Trump, have always been more vocal. And there has been, for the first time in a long time, a shift in that in the last couple of years. Specifically in the last couple of months, I just gave an assignment, and the assignment was a response to Paul Rusesabagina's novel An Ordinary Man, which is about the Rwandan genocide, and students have to compare it to something happening in their own life. And time again, the essays rolled in comparing the current ICE situation to the Rwandan genocide.
Wow.
And so students as young as 15, 16, 17 years old are taking note of this. And for the first time in a really long time, there is anger and frustration and vocality among my liberal and middle ground students. So that's been fascinating to watch. It's interesting. I stay neutral, of course, but that has been what I've seen on the ground in schools.
Yeah. David, thank you very much. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I want to, before we go to our guests here, before we lose this caller who's calling in from Minneapolis, I would like to get to Ramona. Ramona, what about you? You're right in the middle of it right now.
Yeah, this is a really stressful time in Minneapolis. I live pretty close. I live close to Northeast Minneapolis and close to downtown. And a lot of the people I know and within me just feel a constant stress of ICE, coming in and taking people and breaking car windows and just all the violence that's come upon us. And I don't feel like we deserve that in Minneapolis. It seems to me like Trump is saying violence is okay because he's putting violence on Minneapolis and expecting us to back off. And people want to push back. We don't want this in our city. We love our neighbors. So there's that. And I guess the second thing would be the economy is he hasn't helped the economy at all. I guess the stock market is not everything. That's one point I want to make.
Yeah.
So when you're judging how the economy is, he often brings up the stock market is doing great. I don't know what your problem is. And a lot of people can't get into the stock market, and right. We're working our butts off out here and carrying, like most of my life, I did full-time jobs or 2 jobs as a single mother. And I just feel real oppressed myself.
Let me just ask you quickly, Ramona, what do you think is gonna make the situation in Minneapolis calm down?
I think if ICE backs off, if the Supreme Court could okay some legislation to not pass the Insurrection Act and to call those ICE agents out, or maybe make their group smaller, like have 5 ICE agents try to apprehend one person instead of 50.
Right, there have been a lot out there in those situations.
It's a military presence that's really scary.
Ramona, thank you very much for calling in. And Candy Crowley, so much there, but we heard her mention the courts there, and that has been one of the main ways that the opponents of Trump have been trying to stop the things that he's doing that they don't like.
Yeah, and I think what's frustrating to people, I hear this all the time, is it's so slow. And we're used to, okay, like tomorrow this court's going to decide, and then the court decides, and then there's another appeal, and then it goes to another court, and then it ends up in the Supreme Court, and it's got 18 cases. And I think that but they've been the one backstop that you can point to that has said, yeah, no, you can't do this. But the president has also won a number of Supreme Court cases. So I think there's frustration with this, the slowness of the judiciary, which it has always been, deliberately so that if there's a total fairness inside the system, at least that was the idea. But it's a final word usually, but it takes a while to get there, and I think that keeps the anxiety, as Ramona had, keeps it going.
David from Adirondack Park, New York, has been on the line for a long time, so let me get to him. David, what about you? What do you have to say?
Well, like I told your call screener, I am absolutely delighted with just about everything the president's been doing. And I could probably speak to any issue you want to bring up, but the one that I mentioned to the call screener off the top of my head was the arrest of Nicolas Maduro was a little bit of justice for myself, my family, and my deceased son, who was sold illegal drugs, who was in the country illegally, and caused his death.
And do you believe that the Maduro capture was about drugs? Because there have been a lot of reasons put out there for why that happened.
Yeah, I do believe that. That's what he acted on, so that's what I believe.
That's what you believe. David, thank you very much for that. Philip, the foreign policy issues that have come up, you wonder how many people are personally affected by them. Obviously, so many Venezuelan Americans, especially in the state of Florida, very happy about what happened.
Right, and I think when it depends on the context and the region of the world we're talking about. But as Donald Trump has flexed his foreign policy muscles in America's backyard in South America, I think it should be pointed out, number one, the sacking of Nicolas Maduro still leaves in that regime, for the most part, which is still intact in Venezuela. And this is what Donald Trump, I think, is really good at. I think that last caller encapsulates why he's been so successful in electoral politics. Donald Trump knows how to identify what your grievance is and say, I'm going to take some immediate action, even if it's something that a prior president and a predecessor wouldn't even dream of doing it. I'm going to do it because I'm here to serve you. So when you talk to, Trump supporters in that 36% still, about what's going on in Minneapolis and what's going on with the crackdown on immigration, and you show them some of the more brutal images of ICE, they say, well, look, what about Lake and Riley? What about American citizens who've been killed by people who are in this country illegally? Trump speaks to that grievance, I think, in a way that Democrats got caught flat-footed on, even on the cultural issues. You hear a lot of your callers, Jeremy, talking about Nazi Germany or the genocide in Rwanda. All you got to do is talk to old school, older Black Americans, and they'll tell you that this is not new to American history and new to our government or our country here. Think about Emmett Till. Think about lynchings. Think about the treatment of African Americans historically in this country. So a more authoritarian-minded, robust executive that sort of is testing the limits of its power against both Congress and the Supreme Court isn't unprecedented in American history. I think it just might be unprecedented for a certain generation of liberals who weren't accustomed to a president or a Republican president acting in this way.
How about Jared in Kansas City, Kansas? Jared, what about you? How has the first year of Trump's second term affected you?
Yeah, so I think the biggest effect that I've seen hasn't been personally for me, because I think we can talk all day about like the effects on paper, whether it be the economy or with his domestic policy in terms of immigration. But I really think that America in the past has stood as like a talisman for democracy, right? As a flag of freedom that has stood strong through 9/11, through the Cold War, through everything, right? And I think that when you see some of the cutbacks to foreign aid, like USAID getting slashed, or other very, very critical actions that Trump has taken to sort of sully the name of America on the global stage, I think that will be a very long-lasting and damaging effect of his presidency.
Jared, thank you very much for that. Candy, just the image of America under Trump, and not just for people around the world, but for Americans who have always been brought up thinking that we're the good guys.
It's interesting because what you hear either on the radio or the TV or among your friends is, this is not who we are, at least the people who are opposed to a lot of the things that President Trump is doing. And that phrase keeps coming up. This is not who we are. You look at these streets, you look at the kinds of things that ICE is doing with the broken windows, and it doesn't even mention the murder in Minneapolis. So it is not our viewpoint of ourselves. Our viewpoint is we send through USAID a whole bunch of medicine and food, and that's how we see our better selves. And that's how a lot of people see our better selves. And it seems to have disappeared, and that makes people question the identity of the country.
Not just that, but Philip, right as we speak right now, a number of the U.S.'s NATO allies are sending troops to Greenland out of fear that the United States is going to invade.
I think if there's one thing, Jeremy, that Donald Trump's lasting legacy would be, that I don't think, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, the next president is going to have to deal with, is America's allies, its friends across the globe, have a different perception of America now. And I'm talking about some of our chief allies, like old Europe, Western Europe, European allies, who are now realizing that you can't rely on America, that these elections in our country can impact their security, their national security, their international security. So whether or not Donald Trump decides to seize Greenland and take it for the United States, whatever happens with Ukraine and that war with Russia, one thing I think will be a lasting legacy is European nations and other U.S. allies are going to look at themselves and say, there is a world in which America may not be on the world stage as our partner. And that World War II coalition that America lived off of for 60, 70 plus years, I think that's going to be the lasting legacy of the Trump era, which is that America's allies, its friends, look at America differently.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both, USA Today Chief Political Correspondent Phillip Bailey and former CNN Chief Political Correspondent Candy Crowley. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, as always.
And next week, we are going to be asking you what can be done to restore trust in science, which took a hit after the COVID pandemic and has further eroded because of high-profile science skeptics in positions of power in Washington. You can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. I'm Jeremy Hobson. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next week.